When I dropped that folder on the conference table in front of the HR director, the chief compliance officer, and my wife's boss, the color drained from his face so fast I thought he might pass out. My wife's hand, which had been reaching for her coffee, froze midair. That moment, that single frozen moment, made 6 months of meticulous planning worth every sleepless night. Welcome to Cheating Story Exposed. Real stories, real justice, no sugarcoating. You know what? I notice many of you watching haven't hit that subscribe button yet. Here's the thing, we drop stories like this every single day. Stories about people who got played, got smart, and got even. If you want to see how these situations really end, subscribe now and turn on notifications. Trust me, you don't want to miss what happens next. My name is Ethan Clark, and I'm a cybersecurity analyst for a major financial services firm. That detail matters, because what I do for a living is find digital footprints that people think they've erased. I track data breaches, unauthorized access, and security vulnerabilities. I'm trained to see patterns where others see noise. I document everything with forensic precision. These skills, which I use every day to protect my company's infrastructure, became the exact tools I needed when my personal life started showing its own security breach. My wife, Lauren, worked as a senior marketing manager at a tech startup called Innovex Solutions. We'd been married for 8 years. No kids yet, which we'd planned. We both wanted to establish our careers first. I thought we were on the same page about everything. We had a nice condo in the city, 2 car payments, and what I believed was a solid partnership built on trust and mutual respect. Lauren had always been ambitious. I admired that about her. She worked long hours, took on challenging projects, and genuinely seemed passionate about her career. Her boss, Richard Hendricks, was the VP of marketing, a guy in his mid-40s. With an MBA from some prestigious school he mentioned in every other conversation. I'd met him twice at company events. Firm handshake, expensive watch, that practiced smile of someone who's perfected corporate charisma. Nothing about him raised red flags initially. The first real crack appeared on a Thursday evening in late September. Lauren came home around 9, which wasn't unusual, but she seemed distracted. She'd shower immediately after getting home, which also wasn't that strange except she'd already showered that morning. When I asked about her day, she gave vague answers. A tough client presentation, brainstorming sessions that ran late, the usual corporate speak that doesn't really say anything. What caught my attention was her phone behavior. Lauren had never been secretive with her phone before. We had each other's passcodes, could pick up either phone interchangeably. But that night and increasingly in the following weeks, her phone stayed face down on the counter. She'd take it with her to the bathroom. She'd step outside to take calls, saying it was work stuff that was confidential. I'm not naturally a suspicious person. I believe in trust until given a reason not to. But I'm also trained to recognize anomalies in patterns, and the pattern was changing. The conferences started in October. Lauren told me she'd been selected for a leadership development program that required quarterly weekend conferences. The first one was in Boston. She seemed excited, showed me the conference agenda on her laptop, kissed me goodbye Friday morning, and said she'd be back Sunday evening. She came back Sunday evening looking refreshed. Told me about the workshops she'd attended, the networking opportunities, how Richard had personally recommended her for the program. She even brought back a conference tote bag with the program's logo. Everything seemed legitimate. The second conference was in November, this time in Chicago. Same pattern, Friday departure. Sunday return. More stories about leadership modules and strategic planning sessions. She'd post a couple of conference-related photos on her private Instagram, a lecture hall, her name badge on a lanyard, a group dinner with what looked like other professional attendees. But here's where my training kicked in. I work with metadata every day. Every digital photo contains embedded information, timestamps, location data, device information. One evening while she was in the shower, I looked at one of those conference photos she'd posted. The metadata showed it was taken at 2:47 p.m. on a Saturday. But when I did a reverse image search on that specific lecture hall photo, I found it on the actual conference's website from an event that had happened 6 months earlier. She'd downloaded a stock photo and posted it as if she'd taken it herself. That's when I knew. I didn't confront her. That's what most people would do, and it's exactly the wrong move when you don't have complete information. Confrontation gives the other person time to craft stories, delete evidence, coordinate alibis. I'd seen it 100 times in security breach investigations. The moment you tip off the target, they start covering tracks. Instead, I started documenting. I created an encrypted folder on a separate hard drive that I kept at my office. I titled it Project Verification to anyone who might glance at my screen. Inside, I began building a timeline. I checked our credit card statements going back 6 months. There were charges I hadn't paid attention to before. A hotel in Boston the weekend of her first conference, but it wasn't the conference hotel listed on the program website. It was a boutique hotel downtown. 2-room service charges. A bar tab that seemed high for someone attending educational sessions. I looked at her phone records online. Our plan let me access call and text logs without touching her physical phone. There were dozens of calls to one number, always during work. Hours or evenings when she said she was working late. The number belonged to Richard Hendricks. I verified this by calling it once from a burner phone and hanging up when his voicemail greeting started. The texts I couldn't see. They were probably using WhatsApp or another encrypted platform, but the volume of communication told me enough. I installed a GPS tracker on her car, legal in our state for a vehicle I co-owned. The tracker showed patterns that didn't match her stated schedule. On nights she said she was working late at the office, her car would be parked at upscale hotels or restaurants across town. The office parking garage was empty according to my occasional drive-bys. I hired a private investigator in early December. His name was Marcus Webb, a former police detective who specialized in corporate and domestic investigations. I didn't tell him I was already gathering my own evidence. I wanted independent verification. Marcus was thorough and discreet. He cost $200 an hour, which I paid from a separate account Lauren didn't know about, money I'd inherited from my grandfather years ago. Marcus followed Lauren for 3 weeks. His reports came with timestamps, photographs, and video footage. Lauren meeting Richard at hotels. Them having dinner at restaurants in suburbs where they wouldn't run into colleagues. One particularly damning video showed them in a hotel parking garage, kissing beside his Mercedes before going inside together. The third conference was scheduled for January in Miami. This time I did something different. I told Lauren I'd booked a surprise golf weekend with my college friends the same weekend she'd be gone. She seemed relieved, actually. Encouraged me to have a great time. Said it was perfect timing since she'd be busy with conference activities anyway. I didn't go golfing. I flew to Miami on Thursday night, a day before her Friday departure. I stayed at a hotel near the airport and waited. Marcus had given me the name of the hotel where Richard had made reservations. The Meridian Resort, a luxury beachfront property, not a conference hotel. A romantic getaway destination. I didn't check into the Meridian. Instead, I parked in a public lot nearby and waited. Friday afternoon, I watched Lauren and Richard arrive separately about 30 minutes apart. Professional discretion. They didn't walk in together. But the GPS tracker on Lauren's rental car and Marcus's contacts at the hotel confirmed they'd checked into the same suite. I didn't confront them there either. I took photographs from across the street using a telephoto lens, documented their arrivals. Then I flew back home Saturday morning. When Lauren returned Sunday night, I was on the couch watching football. She kissed my cheek, said the conference had been productive, and asked about my golf weekend. I smiled and lied just as easily as she did. By mid-January, I had 6 months of documentation. Financial records showing hotel stays and restaurant charges. Phone logs showing thousands of calls and texts. GPS data showing her real locations versus her stated locations. Private investigator reports with photographic and video evidence. Metadata from her social media posts proving she'd faked conference attendance. And I had something else. Something that would turn this from a personal betrayal into a professional catastrophe for both of them. Innovex Solutions had a strict fraternization policy, specifically regarding supervisors and direct reports. I'd read their entire employee handbook one evening while Lauren was supposedly working late. Richard, as VP of Marketing, was Lauren's direct supervisor. Their relationship violated company policy. More importantly, there were financial implications. Lauren had received 2 significant raises in the past year, plus a promotion to senior marketing manager. Richard had signed off on both. That's called quid pro quo in employment law, workplace benefits in exchange for sexual favors. Even more damaging, I discovered that Lauren had been put on several high-profile client projects that other, more senior team members had complained about being passed over for. I found this out through some casual LinkedIn networking with one of her colleagues, who vented about the unfair project assignments during a happy hour conversation I'd strategically initiated. But the nuclear evidence came from Lauren's laptop. She'd left it open one evening while taking a shower. I had maybe 10 minutes. I didn't need to crack her password. She'd stepped away while already logged in. I connected a USB drive loaded with forensic recovery software, the same tools I use for work. I cloned her entire hard drive in 8 minutes. Every email, every document, every deleted file, all preserved with original timestamps and metadata. Later, analyzing her drive on my secure system, I found email threads between her and Richard discussing their relationship. Messages that explicitly referenced her promotions and raises. One email from Richard to Lauren said, and I quote from my documentation, "You've earned every bit of that raise in more ways than one. Can't wait for Boston." Another from Lauren to him, "I know we have to be careful at the office, but these conferences are what keep me going, worth every risk." They documented their own misconduct in writing. I also found deleted calendar entries that proved they'd been coordinating their schedules to create alibis. Fake client meetings that matched the times her GPS showed her at hotels. Blocked out time on her work calendar labeled as strategic planning sessions that corresponded to their affair timeline. By February, I had everything, but I needed one more piece before I could execute my plan. I needed to understand Innovex Solutions' internal reporting structure and HR investigation process. I spent 2 weeks researching the company's corporate governance. I read their annual reports, press releases, and every public document I could find. I learned that Innovex had recently gone through a major HR overhaul after a discrimination lawsuit settlement. They'd brought in a new chief compliance officer, Patricia Volkov, who'd made her reputation cleaning up toxic corporate cultures. The company was hypersensitive to any hint of impropriety. Perfect. I also discovered that Innovex's board had implemented a zero-tolerance policy for executive misconduct following the lawsuit. Any verified violation could result in immediate termination without severance. Richard's employment contract, which was public due to his executive status, confirmed this. I made my move on a Tuesday in late February. Lauren had told me she was working late on a client pitch that week. According to her GPS, she was at the Marriott downtown with Richard. I've been tracking their pattern. They typically met Tuesdays and Thursdays, times when Lauren told me she had evening client meetings. That Tuesday morning, I'd sent a formal complaint to Patricia Volkov through Innovex's anonymous ethics hotline. The complaint was detailed, factual, and included references to specific policy violations without revealing my identity yet. I reported a relationship between a VP and his direct report, mentioned concerns about promotion and compensation decisions, and suggested the company review travel expenses and project assignments. I knew this would trigger an initial inquiry, probably within 48 hours based on the company's stated response protocols. Wednesday morning, I received a call back from the ethics hotline. A representative asked if I could provide additional information. I said I could, but I wanted to meet in person with senior HR leadership and legal counsel. I provided my name, my relationship to one of the involved parties, and offered to bring documentation. They scheduled a meeting for Friday morning. Attendees would include Patricia Volkov, the head of HR, the company's senior legal counsel, and a board liaison. This was bigger than I'd anticipated, which meant they were taking it seriously. Thursday night, I told Lauren I had an early meeting Friday and would be gone before she woke up. She barely looked up from her phone, probably texting Richard. She said that was fine. She also had an early start. Friday morning, I arrived at Innovex Solutions headquarters at 8:30. I'd been there once before for a company holiday party Lauren had taken me to. The building was modern glass and steel, very tech startup aesthetic. I wore my best suit, carried a leather briefcase containing a tablet loaded with my evidence files, and had printed copies of key documents in case technology failed. Patricia Volkov met me in the lobby personally. She was in her 50s, sharp-eyed, wearing a no-nonsense business suit. She shook my hand firmly and said, "Mr. Clark, thank you for coming forward. Let's talk upstairs." The conference room was on the executive floor. Seated around the table were Patricia, the head of HR named Donald Kramer, the senior legal counsel Stephanie Reeves, and a board member named Jonathan Park. All serious faces. A court reporter was present to document everything, which told me how seriously they were treating this. I spent the next hour walking them through my evidence. I'd organized everything chronologically in a digital presentation. I showed them the financial records with highlighted hotel and restaurant charges. I played portions of the private investigator's video footage showing Lauren and Richard entering hotels together. I displayed phone records showing the volume of communication. I presented the email threads I'd recovered from Lauren's laptop, projecting them on the conference room screen. The room was silent except for my voice, and the occasional scratch of pens on notepads. When I showed them Lauren's fake conference photos with metadata proving they were stock images, Stephanie Reeves leaned forward and said, "She submitted expense reports for these conferences." I nodded. "I have those too. She claimed reimbursement for conference fees, travel, and accommodations. I verified that she never registered for the actual conferences. The charges went to hotels where she was staying with Richard. That's fraud, not just policy violation. Actual criminal fraud." Patricia pulled out her phone and made a call. "I need you to secure Richard Hendricks' office immediately. No one in or out. Lock his computer access. And locate Lauren Clark. She's in the marketing department. Don't alert her, just locate her." She hung up and looked at me. "Mr. Clark, this is extensive documentation. I need to ask, how did you access your wife's laptop files?" I prepared for this question. "The laptop was jointly purchased on our shared credit card. It's legally joint property. She accessed it in our home with the screen visible. I used forensic tools that are legal for civilian use in data recovery situations. I'm happy to provide all original files with untampered metadata. Everything I've gathered is admissible in any legal proceeding." Stephanie, the legal counsel, nodded slowly. "We'll need to verify that, but if what you're saying is accurate, this goes beyond internal policy violations. Expense fraud, misuse of company resources, and potential breach of fiduciary duty by a VP. Jonathan Park, the board member, spoke for the first time. "Richard Hendricks has been with this company for 12 years. He's responsible for accounts worth $40 million annually. If this is true, we have massive liability exposure." Patricia stood. "We're placing both employees on immediate administrative leave pending investigation. Mr. Clark, we'll need you to provide copies of all this evidence for our investigation. We'll also need a formal sworn statement." I'd brought USB drives with copies of everything. I handed them over. "I'm prepared to cooperate fully. I want to be clear about my intentions. This isn't revenge. This is about policy violations and fraud. What happens in my marriage is separate, but what happened in this company broke your rules and possibly the law." Donald Kramer, the HR head, said quietly, "Your wife is in the building. Richard Hendricks is in his office. Do you want to be present when we interview them?" I shook my head. "No, I don't need to see her reaction. I just needed to make sure you had the information to do your jobs." But Patricia made a different call. "Actually, given the fraud allegations, I think we should handle this together. Richard needs to be confronted with this evidence, and Lauren needs to understand the scope of what we've discovered. Mr. Clark, you don't have to be there, but you have the right to be present for Richard's interview as the reporting party." I thought about it. Part of me wanted to walk away, let them handle it internally, go home and start divorce proceedings. But another part of me, the part that had spent 6 months methodically building this case, wanted to see it through. "I'll stay," I said. They called Richard Hendricks to the conference room first. He arrived 10 minutes later, clearly confused about why the chief compliance officer and board member wanted to see him urgently. He walked in with his confident executive stride, tablet under his arm, ready for whatever meeting this was supposed to be. Then he saw me. The confidence cracked. Not completely, but I saw it. A flicker of confusion, then recognition, then the beginning of fear. He knew who I was. We'd met at those company events. He knew I was Lauren's husband. "Richard, have a seat," Patricia said. Her voice was steel. "This is Ethan Clark. He's brought some serious allegations to our attention. We're going to review evidence, and you'll have an opportunity to respond." Richard sat slowly. "What kind of allegations?" I didn't let Patricia answer. I looked directly at him and said, "The kind where you've been having an affair with your direct report for 8 months, falsifying company expenses, and giving her promotions and raises in exchange for that affair. The kind that violate about 15 company policies and constitute fraud." His face went red, then white. I don't know what you think you know, but..." Patricia cut him off. We're going to show you what Mr. Clark knows, then you'll have a chance to explain. We went through it again. The hotel footage, the phone records. But most devastating was when Stephanie read portions of his own emails aloud. His words, his explicit references to Lauren's raises and promotions, his messages about the conferences. These are fake, Richard said, but his voice had no conviction. Those emails, someone manufactured those. I spoke calmly. Every email has full metadata, server logs, and digital signatures from your company's own email system. Your IT department can verify authenticity in about 20 minutes. Would you like us to call them up here? He slumped in his chair. The fight went out of him that fast. I want a lawyer. That's your right, Patricia said. But understand that as of this moment, you're on administrative leave. Your access to company systems is revoked. Security will escort you to collect personal items from your office, and you'll surrender your company laptop, phone, and access cards. Do not contact Lauren Clark. Do not contact any members of your team. Do not discuss this matter with other employees. We'll schedule a follow-up interview once you have legal representation. Richard stood shakily. This is going to ruin me. I looked at him and said, you did that yourself? I just documented it. Security escorted him out. He didn't look at me as he left. 20 minutes later, they brought Lauren in. This was harder. This was my wife of 8 years, the woman I'd built a life with, the person I'd trusted completely. When she walked into that conference room and saw me sitting there with the chief compliance officer and the company's legal team, her expression went through rapid stages. Confusion, recognition, fear, then something that might have been anger or defiance. Ethan, what are you doing here? What's going on? Patricia gestured to a chair. Ms. Clark, please sit down. We need to discuss some serious matters regarding your employment and conduct. Lauren looked at me, then at the executives. She sat. I don't understand. I found my voice, kept it level. They know, Lauren, all of it. The affair with Richard, the fake conferences, the expense fraud, the promotions you got because you were sleeping with your boss. They know everything. I watched her process this. She opened her mouth, closed it, looked at Patricia. I want to speak to Ethan alone. That's not going to happen, Patricia said. This is a company investigation into policy violations and potential fraud. Your personal relationship with Mr. Clark is separate from this proceeding. Right now, we need to address your conduct as an employee of Innovex Solutions. They showed her the evidence. Not all of it, they didn't need to. The hotel videos were enough. The expense reports she'd filed for fake conferences were enough. When Stephanie read portions of the emails between Lauren and Richard, I saw tears start down Lauren's face. It wasn't, she was stammering now. Richard said these conferences were legitimate. He said the company wanted us to attend for leadership development. You thought what? I said, and I couldn't keep the edge out of my voice now. You thought it was normal to share a hotel suite with your boss? You thought those emails about earning raises in more ways than one were about legitimate work performance? She looked at me, and there was genuine pain in her eyes, but I was done feeling sympathetic. Ethan, please, can we talk about this at home? Not here, not like this. There's nothing to talk about at home, I said quietly. I haven't lived with the real you in months. I lived with someone who lied every single day, who looked me in the eyes and lied about conferences, about late nights, about work trips. You're on your own now. Patricia took over. Ms. Clark, you're being placed on immediate administrative leave. You'll surrender your company laptop, phone, and access credentials. Do not contact Richard Hendricks. Do not discuss this matter with colleagues. We'll determine appropriate disciplinary action pending investigation of the fraud allegations. If we determine the expense report falsification constitutes criminal fraud, we'll be referring this matter to law enforcement. Lauren's hands were shaking. Am I fired? That determination will be made after the investigation concludes, Patricia said. But I'll be honest with you. The evidence is substantial. You should prepare accordingly and consider retaining legal counsel. Lauren looked at me one more time. Ethan, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Can we please talk? Please? I stood up. My attorney will contact you about divorce proceedings. Don't come home. I've changed the locks. Your things will be packed and you can arrange pickup through the lawyers. That wasn't entirely true. I hadn't changed the locks yet, but it felt like the right thing to say in the moment. I left the conference room while they finished processing her administrative leave. I didn't want to see her cry. I didn't want to hear more apologies. I'd spent 6 months preparing for this moment, and now that it was here, I just felt empty. Patricia walked me to the elevator 20 minutes later. Mr. Clark, I want you to know we take this extremely seriously. What happened here represents a complete failure of our internal controls and ethical standards. Richard Hendricks will almost certainly be terminated. Your wife's employment is likely over as well. We'll be conducting a broader review of all promotion and compensation. Decisions Richard made in the past 2 years. I nodded. What about the fraud? We're going to let our investigation conclude, but based on what you've shown us, I expect we'll be filing a police report. The expense reimbursements she received under false pretenses total over $8,000. That's felony theft. The elevator arrived. I stepped in, then turned back. Can I ask you something off the record? Patricia considered. Go ahead. Do you think they actually cared about each other? Or was it just convenience and opportunity? She was quiet for a moment. In my experience, Mr. Clark, affairs like this are rarely about love. They're about ego, power, and the thrill of getting away with something. I'm sorry you were caught in it. For what it's worth, you handled this with impressive professionalism. The elevator doors closed. I drove home in silence. No radio, just the sound of traffic and my own thoughts. When I got back to our condo, I looked around at the life we'd built. Furniture we'd picked out together, photos from vacations, the kitchen where we'd cooked dinner together countless nights. All of it felt like scenery from someone else's life now. I called a locksmith and actually did change the locks. Then I called a divorce attorney I'd already consulted with 2 weeks earlier. Her name was Rachel Ortiz, and she specialized in high-conflict divorces. I told her everything had moved forward and we needed to file immediately. I'll have papers ready by Monday, Rachel said. Given the fraud and adultery, we'll be pushing for a fault-based divorce. In this state, that affects asset division significantly. Plus, if she's facing criminal charges, we can use that as leverage. The divorce took 4 months. Lauren tried to reconcile at first, sent me long emails and texts that I forwarded to Rachel and never responded to. When she realized I was serious, her tone changed. She got angry, claimed I'd entrapped her, said the evidence was inadmissible. Her lawyer tried to argue that I'd invaded her privacy and illegally accessed her laptop. Rachel demolished those arguments. Everything I'd done was legal. The laptop was joint property. The GPS tracker was on a jointly owned vehicle. The phone records were from our shared account. The private investigator had only documented activities in public places. Her lawyer couldn't find a single procedural violation. Inovex terminated both Richard and Lauren within 3 weeks of my report. Richard tried to fight it, but his employment contract's morality clause was airtight. Lauren quietly accepted termination rather than drag out a process she knew she'd lose. The district attorney's office did file charges against Lauren for fraud and theft. She eventually pleaded guilty to a reduced charge of misdemeanor fraud, paid restitution to the company, and received probation with community service. No jail time, but a criminal record. Richard wasn't charged criminally, but he faced professional destruction. Word got out in the industry. His career in marketing was effectively over. The divorce settlement was exactly what Rachel had predicted. Because we'd been married less than 10 years and had no children, and because of the proven adultery and fraud, asset division heavily favored me. I kept the condo. Lauren took her car and half of one savings account. She had to withdraw her claim to my retirement accounts. I saw her one last time at the final divorce hearing in June. She'd lost weight, looked tired. When the judge finalized everything, she looked at me from across the courtroom and mouthed, "I'm sorry." I didn't respond. That was 8 months ago. Since then, I've rebuilt my life piece by piece. I sold the condo, too many memories, and bought a smaller place across town. I threw myself into work and got promoted to senior security analyst. I started going to therapy to process everything, which actually helped more than I expected. I learned things about myself through this experience. I learned that I'm capable of patience and strategic thinking under emotional pressure. I learned that documentation and evidence matter more than emotional confrontation. I learned that trust, once broken completely, doesn't repair. It transforms into something else entirely. Acceptance, maybe. Understanding that some people aren't who you believed them to be. I also learned that revenge, even justified revenge, doesn't feel the way you think it will. In the moment when Richard's face went white in that conference room, when Lauren realized her entire life was imploding, I thought I'd feel triumphant. Vindicated. Instead, I felt tired. Relieved that the truth was out, yes. But mostly just exhausted from carrying the weight of betrayal for so long. My friends and family had mixed reactions when they learned what happened. My younger sister thought I was cold and calculating. She said I should have confronted Lauren immediately, given her a chance to explain, maybe tried marriage counseling. She didn't understand that the evidence made explanations irrelevant. Some people think love means giving infinite chances. I think love means respecting yourself enough to recognize when chances have run out. My best friend Carson, who's been through his own divorce, got it immediately. He told me, "You didn't destroy her career, man. She destroyed it herself the minute she decided to sleep with her boss and commit fraud. You just made sure there were consequences. That's not revenge, that's accountability." I think he's right. People throw around the word revenge like it's inherently wrong, but there's a difference between revenge and justice. Revenge is disproportionate, irrational, driven purely by hurt. Justice is proportionate response to actual wrongdoing. Lauren violated company policy, committed fraud, and destroyed our marriage through calculated deception. The consequences she faced were direct results of her choices. Did I orchestrate those consequences? Absolutely. But I didn't fabricate evidence. I didn't lie. I documented reality and presented it to people with the authority to act on it. That's not revenge. That's accountability. About 3 months after the divorce finalized, I ran into one of Lauren's former colleagues at a coffee shop. Jennifer had been one of the people passed over for projects that went to Lauren. We'd met briefly at company events. She recognized me, hesitated, then walked over. "Ethan Wright, Lauren's, sorry, your ex-wife's husband." I nodded. "That's me." She sat down without asking. "Look, I don't know if anyone ever told you this, but what you did, exposing what was happening, half the marketing department wanted to thank you. We all suspected something was going on between Lauren and Richard. The favoritism was obvious, but nobody wanted to report it without proof, and Richard was vindictive to anyone who crossed him. You gave us our department back." I hadn't expected that. "I wasn't trying to save your department. I was just—" "Getting justice for yourself, yeah, but it had ripple effects. The new marketing VP they brought in is actually fair. People are getting promoted based on merit now. The whole culture changed. So, thank you." After she left, I sat there thinking about unintended consequences. I'd been so focused on my own situation that I hadn't considered how many other people Richard and Lauren's affair had affected. Project assignments, promotions, team dynamics. Their selfishness had corrupted an entire department. That conversation helped, honestly. It reframed what I'd done from personal revenge to correcting a systemic problem. I'd exposed corruption that was hurting other people's careers. That felt meaningful in a way that pure revenge wouldn't have. I started dating again around month 5 after the divorce. Nothing serious, just getting back out there. It's strange learning to trust again after what happened. Every time a date mentions working late or having a business trip, there's this automatic spike of anxiety. I'm working through it in therapy, but it's a process. One woman I went out with a few times, Amanda, asked me about my divorce on our 3rd date. I gave her the short version. She was quiet for a moment, then said, "That's incredibly calculated. Does that side of you ever scare you?" It was a fair question. "Sometimes," I admitted. But I think about what would have happened if I'd just confronted Lauren the first time I suspected something. She would have denied it, maybe gotten better at hiding it. Maybe I would have convinced myself I was paranoid. Instead, I got the truth, documented, undeniable. I can live with being calculating if it means I'm not living in ignorance. Amanda and I dated for 2 months before she ended it. She said I was still processing too much from my divorce, wasn't emotionally available yet. She was probably right. I wasn't ready to be vulnerable again. Maybe I'm still not. Work became my anchor through all of this. Ironic, considering my job is what gave me the skills to expose Lauren's affair, but my career is the one part of my life that makes complete sense. Security threats, vulnerabilities, patches, protocols, it's all logical. Cause and effect. No emotional ambiguity. My boss, Raymond, pulled me aside about 6 months after everything went down. "Ethan, your performance has been exceptional lately. I know you've been going through personal challenges, but your work hasn't suffered. If anything, you're sharper than ever. I'm recommending you for team lead on the new infrastructure security project." I got that promotion. It came with a significant raise and more responsibility. Sometimes I wonder if I'm throwing myself into work to avoid dealing with emotional aftermath. Probably I am, but at least I'm productive about it. I also started mentoring younger analysts at work. There's something satisfying about teaching people to think systematically about problems, to document thoroughly, to see patterns in data. One of my mentees, a kid fresh out of college named Tyler, asked me once what the most important skill in cybersecurity was. "Patience," I told him. "Everyone thinks it's technical knowledge or coding ability, but the best security analysts are patient. They watch, they document, they wait for the full picture before they act. Jumping to conclusions gets you breached. Patience gets you answers. He nodded, taking notes like I was sharing profound wisdom. I didn't tell him I'd learned that lesson tracking my wife's affair. Some things stay private. Lauren reached out one more time about 7 months after the divorce finalized. She sent an email, not to my personal address, but to a generic contact form on my company website that she must have found. The email was long, rambling, full of apologies and attempts at explanation. She wrote about how the affair had started innocently, just working late on projects together. How Richard had been charismatic and attentive in ways I supposedly hadn't been. How she'd gotten caught up in the excitement and attention. How she knew it was wrong but felt trapped once it started. How she wished she could go back and make different choices. She'd moved to a different city, was working a low-level marketing job at a much smaller company. Her guilty plea to fraud meant bigger companies wouldn't hire her. She was in therapy trying to understand her own choices. She wanted me to know she was sorry. She wanted closure. I read the email 3 times, then I closed it and never responded. My therapist asked me why I didn't reply, even just to acknowledge it. "Do you think she deserves closure?" she asked. "I think she wants forgiveness," I said. "And I'm not ready to give that. Maybe I'll never be. She didn't just cheat on me." She looked me in the eyes every single day for 8 months and lied. She kissed me goodbye while planning to meet Richard at hotels. She sat across from me at dinner talking about her fake conferences while she was literally defrauding her company and our marriage. That's not a mistake. That's not getting caught up in something. That's sustained, calculated deception. My therapist nodded. "You don't owe anyone forgiveness, Ethan, but at some point you might want to forgive her not for her benefit but for yours so you can fully move forward." Maybe. I'm not there yet. What I have found is a kind of peace with what happened. Not happiness exactly, but acceptance. My marriage is over. The woman I thought I knew doesn't exist. She was a fiction I'd created from partial truths and blind trust. The real Lauren was someone capable of sustained deception for personal gain. That person isn't someone I want in my life. The strange thing is, I don't hate her. I thought I would. In those first weeks of surveillance and documentation, I felt anger so intense it scared me. But somewhere along the way, the anger transformed into something colder and more clinical. By the time I walked into that conference room with my evidence, I wasn't angry anymore. I was just done. I think that's healthier than sustained rage would have been. Anger consumes you. It demands constant attention and energy. What I feel now is more like indifference. Lauren made choices. Those choices had consequences. I was the mechanism that brought those consequences into reality, but I didn't create them. She did. I've thought a lot about what I would say to someone else going through something similar. Document everything. Don't confront until you have complete information. Keep emotions separate from evidence. Find professionals, lawyers, investigators, therapists, and use their expertise. Don't act impulsively. And most importantly, don't mistake strategic thinking for cruelty. Protecting yourself and ensuring accountability isn't the same as revenge. Last month, I went on a date with a woman named Claire who works as a physical therapist. We'd matched on a dating app, had great conversation over dinner, and as the evening was winding down, she asked the inevitable question. "So what happened with your marriage? You don't have to tell me if you don't want to, but I'd like to understand." I gave her the abbreviated version. Wife cheated with her boss. I documented it, reported them both. Marriage over, careers destroyed, criminal charges filed. Claire was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "That must have taken incredible self-control. Most people would have just blown up." I almost did, I admitted. But I work in security. I'm trained to think systematically. It was like debugging code, find the vulnerability, document it, close the exploit. She smiled slightly. Did treating it like a work problem help emotionally? It gave me something to focus on besides the hurt, I said. Gathering evidence gave me purpose when I felt powerless. And knowing I had documentation kept me from doubting myself or letting her gaslight me when things got confrontational. "Are you over it?" Claire asked. "The betrayal, I mean, not just the marriage." I considered that. "I'm past the acute pain. I don't think about her every day anymore, but am I over it? I don't know if you get over betrayal like that. You just learn to live with the scar tissue. It changes how you trust people, makes you more careful. Maybe that's not a bad thing." Claire and I have been seeing each other for 3 weeks now. It's early and I'm being cautious, but there's potential there. She knows my history. She understands why I might need things to move slowly. She's patient, which I appreciate more than she probably realizes. I've started thinking about what I want in the future, not just in terms of relationships, but in life generally. The divorce stripped away a lot of assumptions I'd had about my trajectory. Marriage, kids, growing old with someone, all that evaporated. Now I have to rebuild a vision of my life from scratch. Honestly, that's been liberating in unexpected ways. I'm not tied to anyone else's timeline or expectations. If I want to take a job in a different city, I can. If I want to travel for 6 months, nothing stops me. The freedom that comes from having your worst-case scenario already happen is strange but real. I bought a motorcycle last month, something I'd always wanted but Lauren had vetoed as too dangerous. It's a stupid, impractical machine that makes me grin like an idiot every time I ride it. My sister says I'm having a midlife crisis at 36. Maybe I am, but it feels less like a crisis and more like reclaiming parts of myself I'd compromised away. I've also reconnected with old friends I'd lost touch with during my marriage. Guys from college, former coworkers, people who drifted away as Lauren and I had become more insular as a couple. Having those connections back reminds me that I had an identity before Lauren, and I'll have one after her. One of those reconnected friends, Marcus, not the private investigator, different Marcus, told me something interesting over beers last weekend. Man, you know what's wild? You're actually happier now than you were 2 years ago. Like, I know you went through hell, but present-day Ethan is more engaged, more alive than married Ethan was. I hadn't thought about it that way, but he might be right. The marriage I'd thought was solid had actually been slowly suffocating me in ways I didn't recognize. Lauren's deception created tension I'd absorbed without identifying the source. Living in truth, even painful truth, is less exhausting than living in unacknowledged deception. The legal aftermath continued for months after the divorce. Richard tried to sue me for invasion of privacy, which his lawyer dropped after about 10 minutes of legal research revealed he had no case. Lauren's criminal probation lasted a year. The company implemented new ethics training and oversight protocols partially. Because of what I'd exposed, Innovex's CEO, whom I'd never met during all this, sent me a personal letter about 6 months after my initial report. It thanked me for bringing the misconduct to light and mentioned that the board had implemented several policy changes as a result. There was no financial compensation. I hadn't asked for any, but the acknowledgement felt meaningful. I'd exposed corruption, and the system had actually responded appropriately. That doesn't always happen. I framed that letter and hung it in my home office. Not out of pride exactly, but as a reminder that sometimes doing the difficult thing is the right thing. That documentation and evidence matter. That accountability is possible. My dad called me around month 8 post-divorce. We talked occasionally throughout the process, but he's not an emotional guy, so our conversation stayed surface level. This time, though, he said something that stuck with me. Ethan, I know I didn't say much while you were going through all that, but I want you to know I'm proud of you. Not for the revenge or whatever people want to call it. I'm proud because you respected yourself enough to not accept being lied to. A lot of men would have looked the other way, tried to preserve the marriage at any cost. You valued truth more than comfort. That takes character. Coming from my dad, who's not prone to emotional declarations, that meant everything. I think that's the core lesson from all of this. Truth matters more than comfort. Accountability matters more than convenience. Self-respect matters more than preserving appearances. Lauren chose convenience and comfort. The affair was exciting, the promotions were beneficial, and she assumed she'd never face consequences. I chose truth and accountability, difficult, painful, but ultimately more sustainable. Would I do anything differently if I could go back? I've asked myself that question dozens of times. Maybe I would have hired the private investigator sooner, or installed the GPS tracker earlier. Maybe I would have confronted her after the second fake conference instead of waiting for the third. But fundamentally, no. The methodical documentation, the strategic revelation, the professional approach, all of it was necessary to ensure clean outcomes in the divorce and the company investigation. Quick confrontations feel satisfying in movies. In real life, they just give guilty parties time to create alternative narratives. By the time I walked into that conference room, there was no narrative Lauren or Richard could construct. The evidence was overwhelming and irrefutable. That only happens with patience and thorough documentation. I'm still discovering who I am as a single man in his late 30s. It's different than being single in your 20s. There's more history, more caution, more awareness of what can go wrong. But there's also more self-knowledge. I know what I will and won't tolerate now. I know what real partnership should look like, and I know what red flags I'll never ignore again. Claire asked me on our most recent date what I'd learned from everything that happened. I thought about it for a while before answering. I learned that you can't control other people's choices, only your response to them. I learned that documentation and evidence are more powerful than emotional arguments. I learned that strategic patience beats reactive anger. And I learned that sometimes loving yourself means walking away from people you love or thought you loved when they prove they're not who you believed them to be. She nodded slowly. That's a hard lesson. It was, I agreed. But necessary. I'm better off now than I was living in a marriage built on lies. Even with all the pain and difficulty, truth is preferable to comfortable deception. Looking back at where I was a year ago, suspicious, gathering evidence, planning my confrontation, compared to where I am now feels like looking at a different person's life. Ethan was living in controlled chaos, maintaining a facade of normalcy while his world crumbled internally. This Ethan has rebuilt on a foundation of truth, however uncomfortable that truth was to discover. My work continues to be excellent. My personal life is slowly reconstructing. My sense of self is stronger than it's been in years. And I sleep at night knowing I handled one of life's worst betrayals with intelligence, dignity, and strategic precision. If someone had told me a year ago that I'd end up grateful for what happened, I would have thought they were insane. But there's a strange gratitude that comes from having illusions stripped away, even brutally. I'm grateful I discovered the truth rather than living in ignorance. I'm grateful I had the skills and resources to document that truth thoroughly. I'm grateful the legal and professional systems actually worked the way they're supposed to. And I'm grateful I had the strength to choose accountability over comfort. Lauren made her choices. Richard made his, I made mine. The difference is I can look back on my choices without shame or regret. Every decision I made was measured, legal, and proportionate to the situation. I didn't sink to their level. I didn't become vindictive or cruel. I simply ensured that actions had consequences. That's not revenge. That's justice. And justice, it turns out, is cold comfort, but it's comfort nonetheless. I still have Lauren's last email saved, the one I never responded to. Sometimes I open it and reread her apologies and explanations, not because I'm tempted to respond, but because it reminds me why I did what I did. Her words are full of excuses and self-justification, the narrative of someone who wants forgiveness without true accountability. Maybe someday I'll delete it. For now, it serves as a reminder that I made the right choice, that the woman who wrote those excuses isn't someone I want in my life, that moving forward alone is better than staying in a relationship built on lies. The motorcycle sits in my garage, ready for weekend rides. The new condo is decorated exactly how I want it, no compromises. My career is thriving. New relationships are forming. Life isn't what I planned a year ago, but it's honest. And honest, even when difficult, beats comfortable lies every single time. That's what I learned from the wife's work conference that wasn't a conference at all. From the affair I documented with forensic precision. From the 6 months of strategic patience that led to that conference room confrontation. And from the aftermath of choosing truth over comfort. Some people will say I went too far, that I should have handled it privately, that I destroyed 2 careers unnecessarily, that I was cruel and calculating. Those people have never faced sustained, calculated betrayal. They've never looked into the eyes of someone they trusted completely and realized every word out of their mouth was a lie. I don't need those people's approval. I have something better. I have self-respect. I have peace of mind knowing I acted with integrity, and I have a future that's built on truth rather than comfortable deception. And honestly, that's enough. The story ends where it began, with evidence, with confrontation, with consequences. But for me, it's not really an ending. It's a beginning. The beginning of a life where I trust myself enough to act on what I know to be true. Where I respect myself enough to demand honesty. Where I'm strong enough to walk away from anything less. Lauren's fake conference destroyed our marriage, but my response, methodical, documented, strategic, saved my integrity. I'd make that trade every time. That's the real story, not just what happened, but what it taught me about myself, about what I'm capable of when pushed, about the difference between revenge and justice, about the value of truth, even painful truth, and about the man I became when everything I thought I knew turned out to be a lie. A stronger man, a wiser man, a free man. That's the victory no conference room confrontation could ever fully capture. The real win wasn't watching Richard's career implode or seeing Lauren face consequences. The real win was reclaiming myself from a relationship that had slowly been eroding my sense of reality. So to anyone out there facing something similar, trust your instincts. Document everything. Act strategically, not emotionally. Find professionals to guide you. And above all, respect yourself enough to demand truth, even when lies are more comfortable. Because at the end of the day, you're the one who has to live with your choices. Make sure they're choices you can be proud of. Make sure they're choices that honor the person you want to be. I did that. It cost me a marriage, months of emotional turmoil, and the comfortable life I thought I was building, but I got myself back, and that was worth everything.